What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Nick 4K video. Today we're checking out a video from It's Greg Khan. And his video says, why are 2000 movies weird? So I'm going to guess he's going to go over all like the random movies that popped up from the like crazy action-packed like Transformers movies, right? All the way to like the super dark edgy movies like Blade. Stuff like that. He's only a couple years younger than me, so we're probably going to have similar opinions from a certain perspective, but I'd like to see what he has to say, and I'm going to either agree or disagree with him as we go through the video. So if you enjoy this video, you want to see more like this, make sure to like, subscribe, turn notifications for more. With that said, let's begin.
If you're like me, you were a dumb baby in the year 2000. I was born in 1998, so I'm an elderly Gen Z. I have no standing in the Gen Z millennial war. I barely relate to either generation. I do, however, have a standing in the media landscape of the 2000s, because that's the media that raised me. Throughout the decade, this dumb little baby fell in love with the art of filmmaking. I look back at the years 2000 to 2009 with a fondness for their strangeness. If we've learned anything from the past couple of years, it's that time is a meaningless flat circle. And so the designation of decade is somewhat arbitrary. In terms of style and subject matter trends, the 2000s is not noticeably different from the year 1999 or 1998 and so on. The evolution of trends is gradual. Nonetheless, looking back at a chunk of 10 years is a pretty useful way to determine certain cultural trends. But I'm not a fashion queen, so this video isn't concerned with cargo shorts and American Eagle leather bracelets. This dumb little baby cares about movies. Sometimes I think back to the movies we watched during the 2000s, and I'm a little baffled that some of them even got made. And so, my good friend Matt and I meticulously scrolled through the film releases from 2000 to 2009 to try and answer the following questions. What kinds of movies were being made in the 2000s that don't get made today? How is the decade different from any others? And what does that say about this era of film? Pop your favorite Creed single into your Walkman and take a stroll down to the nearest Blockbuster, because we're looking at movie trends of the 2000s. Hope your rental fees
I'm excited.
In a lot of ways, an average week at the movies was really different during the 2000s. For example, the 2000s were probably the last era when a popular leading actor could send a movie to the top of the highest grossing list. When I was a kid, Ashton Kutcher was basically a genre of movie in and of itself. Or Tom Cruise. People would just show up to the theater like, yeah, it's the new Tom Cruise movie. I wonder what he's gonna run from this time. Nowadays, Tom Cruise alone doesn't sell a movie. It's the franchise that he's attached to. That's not to say that there wasn't a certain amount of franchise dominance during the 2000s. In fact, this is the decade where the franchise focus started. But still, this whole franchise approach wasn't boiled down to a formula yet. It was a really big risk to bank on any movie getting a sequel, let alone a series or spin-off. Lord of the Rings was a huge gamble that paid off. Same with Harry Potter. Big movie studios didn't anticipate a massive multi-level franchise the way they do now. Nonetheless though, sequels and franchises were more frequently raking in the big bucks. But old habits die hard, and so a lot of original standalone movies were made, and a massive chunk of them tried to bank on the perceived trends of the 2000s.
Okay, so before we continue, I do want to point out that like he's right about that. Like studios took chances back then, and even if something wasn't necessarily incredibly popular at first, they gave it a shot to see if it could become something. Like the Fast and Furious type of thing. You know, it was one of those things where like they gave it a shot, and then look, it's like 10 movies in now. And it's crazy, and I love it because it's so crazy, but it's one of those things where like studios took chances more, where now it's like, even with TV shows, they'll do a TV show the first season and they're just getting going. And like if the TV show doesn't do what they want, they'll just cut it. Like Netflix does that all the time. And it's one of those things where it's like, bro, like you gotta give these shows time to breathe. Like you have to give shows like 3 seasons to really breathe. You can't just cut them after the first season or even like the second season type of thing. I don't know, I've definitely noticed a trend over the last 20 years where that has become a lot more prevalent. Like studios look at movies like, if we're not making Marvel buku bucks, then it's not worth it. But Marvel had years to set things up. Now of course Marvel has dropped the ball as of late. They're kind of getting back on their footing now. But it's one of those things where you notice that, and you got to give time for things to grow, and that's just what it comes down to. And a lot of studios, they want their money now, and of course they have like these super inflated budgets. It's just like they got to bring the budgets down and just, you know, try to make a good product before you start selling it, right? That's what it comes down to.
Besides that slow creeping franchise dominance, what else were the trends? Well, of course, certain trends from the 90s carried over to the 2000s. The first one of these I like to think of as the sexy vampire trend. I'm gonna go ahead and blame 1994's Interview with a Vampire for the popularity and staying power of this trend. Later on in the 90s, we saw Blade, a franchise that reshaped the vampire genre and squeezed it into tight leather. Throughout the 2000s, we saw lots of movies trying to recapture this vibe.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
There was Van Helsing, Dracula 2000, and of course Twilight.
Oh.
These were all centered around.
Okay, so real quick, guys. I know the Van Helsing movie gets a lot of hate, but I actually really like that movie. That is super underrated, fun movie. It kind of feels like, remember the Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser? It feels like that, except for with like gothic setting. I still think that's one of those movies that could have gotten a sequel, but I'm glad it didn't because it's still really good standalone film. But it's one of those things where like people forgot about it, but when you remember it, you're like, oh yeah, I had a fun time with that movie. So I don't know, I like it.
Around being a modern take on one of the horror genre's oldest villains, but instead of being wholly terrifying, they're kind of tempting. The strongest of these sexy vampire movies has to be Underworld. Okay, maybe not the strongest, but how do I say most appealing to me as a little boy? There were 5 of these movies. 5. Wait, 5? I've got some catching up to do. We owned the first 3 of them on DVD when I was a
Okay, so I have to be honest, I've never watched any of the Underworlds. I've always heard good things, that they're really fun, action-packed movies. I just have never watched them. So I'm going to have to check them out. Eventually I'll pick them up on 4K, and I'll actually go through them. Maybe I'll do like a tier list or something towards that. But yeah, I haven't watched them yet. But I do know I like Kate Beckinsale. You know what I mean? She's good looking, you know? So just on that alone, I should definitely check it out.
kid. How could anyone grow up during the 2000s and not end up loving leather and latex? It was everywhere. Superheroes were covered in leather. Trinity was covered in latex. Even Velma wore a shiny faux leather outfit.
Who's your mommy?
They really did push that.
And I'm not entirely against this trend coming back. 2000's Coyote Ugly is credited with popularizing the trend of leather pants, but I think a huge amount of credit should also be given to the genre of sexy vampire movies for really showing us how to strut around in shiny pants. Despite Hollywood's best efforts, this genre was finally dead by the mid-2010s, probably due to oversaturation. Another trend that started in the 90s but really gained steam in the 2000s was nostalgia for the 70s. This is a theme that we can see repeat throughout the 2000s and in many different genres. In the 90s, we saw Dazed and Confused, Boogie Nights, and television's That 70s Show. So by the 2000s, the 1970s nostalgia had reached a peak. There were a lot of remakes of 70s media, like Gone in 60 Seconds, The Longest Yard, Shaft, Charlie's Angels, and so on. This nostalgia might be partially responsible for the success of Tarantino's films during this era, which have always borrowed heavily from 70s exploitation movies. Aside from Tarantino's work, most of the 70s nostalgia movies from the 2000s are completely forgotten. Unlike a bulk of the 70s nostalgia movies that I just mentioned, 2000's Bring It On is largely well remembered by a lot of people today. Bring It On was a huge hit in the year 2000, and as a result it had a huge influence on this trend of cheerleading and dance competition movies.
Yeah, so I don't know if we'll cover this, he might, but besides the cheerleading movies, like Bring It On made a bunch of them. I'm actually in one of those, by the way. I'm in like the 4th one, whatever one they go to cheer camp. I'm in the background of a shot. I think I uploaded a video of it one time, but yeah, I'm walking in the shot. Maybe I'll do like a short to show you guys, but yeah, I was only like 8 or 9 at the time. I forget, but you see me, I'm in there. Anyways, besides that little tangent, there was this span of like coming of age movies that really came out in the early 2000s as well. I feel like sometimes people forget about that spot, and I think because it's one of those things where like they overdid it for a while. Like it was like 10 Things I Hate About You, which I love. Then there's American Pie, which I also love, and there's a lot of other movies along those lines. Bring It On 1 was kind of like that too, and then the rest of them kind of became their own thing. But there are a lot of movies like that, the coming of age teenage movie, where it's one of those things where I feel like those movies don't get enough credit when we talk about 2000s movies. There's a span of time between like The Lord of the Rings and Spider-Man 1, right? And then we got like Star Wars Episode 3, and then we had like Transformers, and that's kind of like what people look at when they think about 2000 movies, like that. But there were a span of movies in that time which really did resonate with a lot of people that people just kind of forgot about or just don't talk about. I don't know, and Bring It On was one of them. So maybe he'll talk about that in this video, but yeah, I think it's one of those things where it gets a little, it's underestimated, I guess you could say.
Never forget that Channing Tatum was at one point defined by his role in Step Up. There was also Man of the House in 2005,
I forgot he was in
Fired
that.
Up in 2009, Sugar and Spice in 2001.
Oh,
Sugar and
man,
Spice was
Fired
a
Up
little bit
is
more unique
amazing.
with its story than Fired Up and Man of the House, but it's largely been forgotten. Step Up, on the other hand, had several sequels and influenced its own subgenre of sexy dance competition movies. Stomp the Yard, You Got Served, and even the sequel to Cinderella Story. Honestly, the best thing that came out of this cheer dance competition trend was that it gave us Channing Tatum. Other than that, this trend can stay in the 2000s. Here's a trend that I actually want to make a comeback though. One of my mom's favorite movie genres that lived and died in the 2000s is the genre that I like to call beach movie. Like the label suggests, these are movies that take place predominantly on a beach, and most likely function as a vacation getaway for the cast and crew. Because hey, if you're gonna get paid to make a movie, why not do it while housing pina coladas on the beach? The characteristics of a beach movie are...
Yeah, Adam Sandler does a lot of these. I don't blame him, but if you think about it, half of Adam Sandler's movies are either him in New York, where he lived, or him in at like the beach or like on vacation somewhere like that. And you know what? Hey, he's smart. I'd probably do the same thing, honestly. But if you think about it, that's just the way it is. It's funny.
Are tropical settings, deep orange tans, blonde hair, and beach bods. This look was the epitome of style during the mid-2000s. So naturally, the beach movie genre capitalized on it. There was so damn many of these movies, and my parents had just about all of them on DVD. While they all take place on a beach, the narrative substance of a beach movie can vary.
There he is again.
It can be a romance, a heist movie, a comedy, or a mix of all three. What an incredibly diverse genre for the most sophisticated cinema enjoyer. The ones I saw the most as a kid were Fool's Gold, Into the Blue, and After the Sunset. But there was also The Heartbreak Kid, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, 50 First Dates, The Beach, The Big Bounce, Surfer Dude, Blue Crush, Aquamarine, A Perfect Getaway, Couples Retreat, Dirty Dancing, Havana Nights, and so many more. I used to really resent this genre as a kid, but now that it isn't as popular, I kind of feel bad that my mom doesn't have as many more new beach movies to watch. Not that that stops her from constantly rewatching the ones I just mentioned. For the sake of my mom's entertainment, I hope that the mid to big budget beach movie makes a comeback soon. One day, Mom, I promise, I'll make the blondest, most orange-tanned beach movie just for you. What else? There was this trend of American martial arts movies during the 2000s, likely due to the popularity of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, as well as Jackie Chan's career move to the States. Come to think of it, The Matrix also probably brought Kung Fu to mass American audiences for the first time. I don't know what to make of this.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I remember there was Jet Li and there was Jackie Chan. Jet Li was more of like a perfectionist. He did more like choreographed stunts type of fighting stuff, and then Jackie Chan was more like of a wacky choreographed fighting person. But I always loved Jackie Chan. Jet Li's great too, but Jackie Chan, he was one of those people that, like, I would say that he is probably the leading reason for why Kung Fu movies became so popular during this time. Because I remember being a kid and hearing Jackie Chan movie and being like, oh, I gotta watch it. I remember thinking that. So, yeah, he's a big deal. And he's such like a humble, chill dude too, which is just one of those things where like makes you love him even more, you know?
Trend. I love Kung Fu, but some versions of American Kung Fu are likely problematic, and I'm not the best person to dig into that. But let's face it, American Kung Fu is almost never as good as actual Kung Fu movies. The only benefit for me was that some of these martial arts movies eventually led me to explore the old Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest Kung Fu flicks from the 70s. Actually, maybe the American attempts at Kung Fu were also part of the wave of 70s nostalgia that I mentioned earlier. See? We're learning, I think. You know, it's a great way to learn, according to 2000s movies. Swap bodies with that one person in your life who you just don't understand. Freaky Friday captures two of the biggest trends of this era: baggy alt comfort clothing and Lindsay Lohan. And it's another remake of a movie from the 70s. It's kind of awesome that this project that began as a remake of something people from the 70s were nostalgic for is now this perfect storm of 2000s nostalgia. After Freaky Friday, there were a bunch of movies throughout this decade that tried to recapture its magic. The Hot Chick, 13 Going on 30, 17 Again, The Shaggy Dog, and even that one scene from Scooby-Doo. Can this trend please come back? Not the body swap. I mean Linda Cardellini as Velma looking like a goddess sent from heaven. Actually, never mind. mind. Let's not treat people like trends. There were a bunch of human beings, actors, who were treated as trends during this time, and then immediately disposed of once their misery stopped being profitable. Namely, people like Lindsay Lohan and Amanda Bynes. Hollywood tried to make Brendan Fraser like a himbo Harrison Ford, but he was quickly dropped by the public after a messy divorce and some movies that flopped. I don't know if I should even dig into this. My name's not D'Angelo and this isn't a drama channel. I think this idea kind of ties back to what I said at the start about a famous actor being able to sell a movie more than a franchise or a director. I don't know. Free Britney. That shit's scary. Now, let's pivot to some fake scaries.
You know what, real quick. I wanna tap on that because that is a very interesting concept. The idea that like my parents, they grew up not necessarily excited for the movie, but excited for the actor being in the movie. And I did hear about that. Like for me, I grew up excited for the movie, not for the actors. I never saw a movie with Tom Cruise and said, "Oh, I gotta watch that movie," right? But my parents, they grew up seeing like, "Oh, Tom Cruise is in this. Oh, Robert De Niro's in this," you know. I guess technically like my version would be like The Rock, maybe like I'd hear The Rock is in something, I'd be like, oh cool, but I was never like I have to go see this. Oh, perfect example. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. Those were two guys who could sell any movie. Even if the movie was trash or the movie was amazing, if they were in that movie, people would show up for them. That's probably like the best example I can think of. But there were people who would do that, regardless of how good the movie was. The movie could be completely bad. But if Sylvester Stallone's in there, even if he's there for 5 minutes, people will go pay to see that movie just to see him. And it's one of those things where that's just not the case anymore. I mean, maybe you could make an argument for Robert Downey Jr. kind of being that, but at that same time, I personally don't go to all of his movies. What he do? After Endgame, he did Dr. Dolittle, and that movie flopped. So, I mean, people didn't go see it, and it's because people like him as Tony Stark. I don't know if people like him as other stuff. I mean, he did great in Oppenheimer, and he has a lot of other roles where he's great, like Tropic Thunder, right? But I didn't go to see those movies because of him. So, I don't know. It's interesting how that has kind of changed. Before, studios would sell movies based off of the actors in them, so the quality didn't matter as much, right? Because people were going to see the movie anyways. Where now, that doesn't work anymore, right? So studios actually have to try. And they fail. Well, not all the time, but they do fail a lot. So it's interesting. Very interesting.
The horror trends of the 2000s. There were a lot of torture movies and found footage, just really trying to lean into that gritty aesthetic that was so popular on everything at the time. There were also a few horror movies in the 2000s that tried to tackle some of the fears of emerging tech advances, just stuff that was like, what if your cell phone, but evil? Yeah, I know my cell phone is evil, but I need it to get a job and to take pictures of my parents' dog. Both are equally important. The whole what if tech bad genre hasn't really gone away and probably never will. Another horror trend from this era was American remakes of Japanese horror movies. The only thing I really want to note here is The Ring, and specifically its colors. It's a great example of early digital color grading for a couple of reasons. It looks gross and sickly, like a lot of early color jobs from this decade. But the sick look definitely suits the tone and mood of this movie. A lot of movies at this time tried to copy the look of The Matrix with the heavy greens and blues, but few of them actually got the memo that this look has to serve a purpose. You mean to tell me that visuals in a visual medium have to have a purpose? Well, color me tones of green and blue. The colors in The Ring and The Matrix serve their respective stories in different ways. Also, 2000's Oh Brother Where Art Thou uses digital color to make the movie feel like an old book with grimy, yellowed pages. The aesthetic is still really unique in how it suits the story. Unfortunately, there's a lot of early digital colors in movies from this era that just look super radioactive. I do think it's really cool to see the industry work their way through this new technology. And it makes me feel less bad for how fucked some of the colors look in my early experiments with color grading.
There was also the span of time, like he just mentioned, where like every movie was just like weirdly colored. And there was a span of like, especially like 2006 to like 2009, there was just these movies where it's like, why is this colored like this? Like the first Twilight was like that, like all the examples he just showed. It's like, why is the color grading so weird? And then movies that got sequels to that original one ended up looking better later. Like what I said with like Twilight 1, it was so blue, it was so weird looking, right? It was supposed to feel angsty, I guess. I don't know. But then the sequels, they fixed the color grading on it. So I don't get it. The 4K versions of that movie actually look better. But I remember thinking like, wow, this is a very weird looking color. And I really hope that this whole trend disappears. And it did, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's just weird. Why did they do that?
The 2000s are just this fascinating, awkward period of movies in a lot of ways. Even the box office dominators weren't as calculated as they are now. Or they were calculated, but not with the same goal in mind. Early superhero movies from this era were definitely cashing in on a trend, but they didn't have this baked-in assumption that they would spawn a dozen sequels and spin-offs. There wasn't some massive plan with phases to it like a military operation. Affleck did not sign a 10-year contract to play Daredevil. It's cute to look back on, because I remember people saying that this genre was dying way back when X-Men Origins Wolverine came out. It didn't die. Some producers just learned to plan, likely heavily influenced by the miraculous success of the Harry Potter franchise. You can start to see an increasing amount of sequels and franchises creep up to the top of the box office records throughout this decade. So of course, Hollywood turned the franchise into an unstoppable formula by the 2010s. That's why we are where we are now, and that's probably why so many of these weird little trends from the 2000s have been completely eradicated. Studios don't need them to make money anymore. I guess what interests me so much about this decade, besides pure childhood nostalgia, is that it feels like such a massive pivot for the film industry. All the new tech, digital cameras, post-production innovations, and of course, the blooming vines of franchise dominance that we see before us today. There were so many creative people trying to redefine the art of filmmaking, to the point where those innovations kind of overshadow some of the strange and niche trends that didn't survive. Trends seem vapid in the moment when they're popular. But looking back, they paint a very clear picture of the cultural landscape at the time. I guess the point of this video is me trying to map out that landscape a little bit, based entirely on what I remember and what I miss. What about you? Are there any niche movie genres or trends from the 2000s that I didn't bring up? I know I didn't hit on all of them. Anyways, thanks for watching, and shout out to Channing Tatum in She's the Man. And don't even think about bringing back these harsh blonde highlights. I don't want to see it.
Good video there, Greg Kahn. Definitely a great video. He mostly covered the bigger ones, but I covered the other ones throughout the video. But ultimately what it comes down to is, yeah, it's crazy to look back at these movies and think that these are 20 years old now. And to see just how much the industry has changed and the way that they make movies. It's crazy. What do you guys think? Do you think it was for the better? Do you think it was for the worse? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn notifications for more. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. Peace.